Parked in a lot outside of a work site, several construction workers waited for the police to reach them. They had been blocked from accessing the construction site where they worked and called the police in hopes of dispersing the rallying mass of people gathered there. They soon noticed a dark sedan pull up and park next to them. Several men emerged from the vehicle, armed with baseball bats, and proceeded to smash the windows and headlights of the trucks the workers were in. In fear, they exited, and 2 of them were taken to the hospital for further treatment of their injuries. So, what did they do to deserve such brutality? Their crime? They did not belong to a labor union. The thugs who viciously attacked them were part of the local union and were protesting the construction of a store by non-unionized workers. This incident may seem extreme and isolated, but it in fact is not. This has happened many times in the past, sometimes even including shootings. Unions are far from the seemingly caring organizations dedicated to protecting your paycheck and rights. Rather, they have become labor cartels, intent on doing whatever is necessary, even if violent, to get what they want. I will be arguing that labor unions are inconsistent with a virtuous and free society. Unions were originally intended to improve working conditions and negotiate increased wages. But with all the recent controversy surrounding unions, it is appropriate and necessary to examine their historical roles in both the public and private sectors. In pre-Revolutionary War and colonial times, unions were virtually non-existent. This was partly due to the Tudor Industrial Code, which was written in order to protect both the employer and the employee. It declared illegal any combination of workmen to secure higher wages, but protected them as well by restraining wrongful dismissal of employees in fixed minimum wages by justices of the peace. Working class solidarity was a strange concept, and many viewed unions as criminal and antisocial. The citizens of the new American nation celebrated competition and freedom and viewed unions as stifling forces in the emergence of a fledgling economy. But unions gained a foothold in the United States in the 1880s, after the Industrial Revolution introduced a surge of new workers into the labor force. Technology had vastly improved, and manufacturing greatly expanded because Americans turned internally for goods rather than abroad. Samuel Gompers formed the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, which created a conglomeration of national trade unions of various crafts. Although membership accounted for less than 2% of the national labor force, this period marked the emergence of the Progressive Era and a new political climate of pro-union thought. The 1900s saw the increasing prominence of labor unions, especially due to World War I. Membership increased from 6% in the beginning of the century to 12% due to the war, but regressed back to 6% by 1933. The next 20 years saw an influx of legislation aimed at supporting unions through government programs and the establishment of labor boards. By 1950, 20% of the workforce was unionized, comprised of 14.8 million people. The rate has steadily declined since then, back to 12% in 2010. Most union members today are part of the public sector, as private sector unions decline and the size of government drastically increases. Now let me make it clear. Important issues do come about in the workplace. I am not undermining these issues. But what I am arguing is that the union is not the way to resolve such issues, because they are inconsistent with a virtuous and free society. First, because they are superfluous. Second, they are economically unsustainable. And third, they present moral problems. First, government regulations have made unions superfluous. According to the AFL-CIO, which represents 12.2 million union members today, unions exist in order to, quote, give workers a voice on the job about safety, pay, benefits, best ways to get the work done, end quote. But with the many already existing government regulations, unions are rendered completely unnecessary. Consider the following pieces of legislation aimed to protect workers in any type of potential job concern: minimum wage, mandatory vacation, overtime pay, breaks, anti-discrimination laws, disability laws, unemployment insurance, healthcare, and retirement funds. The list goes on and on. Furthermore, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, exists in order to maintain high standards of health working conditions and training to working men and women. Corporations will readily comply with such laws at the expense of messy lawsuits and damaged public perception. Corporations will not risk their standing in the public. Most large firms even have specific employee positions dedicated solely to preventing or settling lawsuits due to industry-specific government regulations. Current laws vastly favor the employee. Every aspect of every type of job has already been legislated, from the number of hours someone is allowed to work, to the quality of the air in the working environment. Unions add an extra, unnecessary layer of protection to already protected workers. The goals of the union, as stated by their own representation, have already been met, making them redundant. Secondly, labor unions have vast economic repercussions for the consumer, the state debts, and the global market. The consumer is affected because unions raise operation costs. Union members are paid up to 30% more than non-unionized workers. This means that employers must reduce the number of workers they employ. The end result is that goods cost more to manufacture and more for you to buy. State budgets and debts are also hurt because of unions. Labor unions drive out businesses, but continue to demand more pay and more benefits at the expense of taxpayers. California is the ultimate example of this situation. Much of the state's debt, which amounts to $265 billion at a low estimate, is due to unionized public employees. Their extensive benefits and wages come at the expense of the solvency of the state. The treasurer has even said, quote, "It's impossible for this legislature to reform the pension system, and if we don't, it will bankrupt the state," close quote. Yet recently elected Governor Jerry Brown stands in support of the unions, telling them, quote, "You've got a friend, an ally, and a partner as we go forward together," close quote. It doesn't seem that the situation in California will get any better, but it must in order to avoid an unprecedented collapse. The broadest impact of unions can be seen in the global market, especially in developing economies like China and India. These two countries will ultimately profit the most from the union's excessive demands. Employers cannot sustain the costs of such demands for very long and are forced to find cheaper labor outside of the United States, usually provided by China and India. When President Obama met with the late Steve Jobs and asked him what it would take to manufacture iPhones in the United States again instead of China, Jobs responded with, quote, "Those jobs aren't coming back," close quote. Employers find the labor force in China so attractive because, quote, "The vast scale of overseas factories, as well as the flexibility, diligence, and industrial skills of foreign workers have so outpaced their American counterparts that made in the USA is no longer a viable option for most Apple products," close quote. China and India are so successful because they can provide massive amounts of workers for a fraction of the cost of American unionized workers. The problems brought by the unions are compounded by the International Monetary Fund's prediction that China will surpass the United States in economic power within the next 5 years. Economically, unions make no sense to anyone except for themselves. Thirdly, unions have several moral problems. Unions are coercive. Many cities require that every public employee in that city join a union. Closed shop workplaces require the same as a condition of employment. No union, no job. And when these employees join that union, they are forced to pay dues and other fees in order just to keep their jobs. This money is then used to fund political campaigns or the union president's salary, not help the worker. Moreover, unions are ignoring a larger social problem. Workers should be turning to the church if they have any issues with their employer or are being treated poorly in the workplace, rather than the union, and certainly not the National Labor Relations Board. This ensures that a thoroughly biblical approach is taken to the situation, and a virtuous culture is being fostered, not one of anger and strife. Government and unions cannot build a society founded on Christian virtues. Only the church can. The state can only coerce. As a result, unions push the church to the periphery of society, and members turn to the government for their daily bread. Now, proponents of the labor movement cite the fact that unions maintain and support the middle class and the working man as reasons to further organize labor. They say that unions protect the rights of workers from the evil, greedy corporations. But if unions have already achieved the desired results of more pay, better safety, and more benefits, as I demonstrated previously, why are they not obsolete? The answer to this question lies in their extensive record of political involvement, to the extent that unions are no longer representatives of the working man, but rather political organizations. SEIU President Andy Stern, speaking about the 2008 presidential election, has said, quote, "We spent a fortune to elect Barack Obama, $60.7 million to be exact, and we're proud of it," close quote. Unions today are basically political action committees, using their members' hard-earned money to fund political campaigns that will elect politicians to redirect money back to unions and gain power, something radically different from their initial mission of uplifting the working man and working-class families. Others argue that if there are no unions, workers will be taken advantage of. However, federal agencies set and enforce strict standards for the workplace, and the penalty for not complying goes beyond a severe monetary fee. Corporations that do not comply are vilified and targeted for not establishing fair labor practices for employees. But besides this, it seems to me that rather than corporations taking advantage of unions, unions are the ones taking advantage of corporations. Corporations already pay union members more than $200 per week over the average non-unionized worker. And in a recession, when most people are willing to take pay cuts just to keep their jobs, union members keep asking for more. The situation is vastly skewed in favor of the unions, and corporations and consumers pay the consequences. And then there are those who say that unions are a very American concept, referring to the freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution. To this, I say that unions are radically anti-free market and against the values that were cherished by our founders. Unions essentially form monopolies using coerced funds in their industry. This is fundamentally different from reaping the rewards of your labor in a free market society. This is not at the heart of the American nation, nor what the founders envisioned for a new nation. Because labor unions are superfluous, economically unsustainable, and present moral problems, they are inconsistent with a virtuous and free society. The best way to return workers to their proper place in society and the workplace is turning to the church. Employees, if faced with a legitimate work issue, should go to the church and deal with it in a proper biblical manner. The church may decide to boycott a service or product, but they will not coerce anyone else to join with them, as unions do. States must also reverse the mandates that they have placed for unions by allowing for decertification and right-to-work laws. Decertifying a union simply means that workers no longer pay dues or answer to a union representative or abide by union rules. They leave the union. The right to work laws also provide for this by allowing workers not to join a union or coerced into joining a union in the first place. When given a choice, most people opt out of joining a union. Wisconsin is a prime example of this, having recently passed legislation aimed at reducing the scope and influence of unions. The public employees of New Berlin, Wisconsin, decided not to recertify their union. Instead, the more than $7,000 collected in dues from only 50 employees went to food banks and cancer research centers. This money could have been used to fund strikes or political campaigns, but instead it blessed the hungry, the poor, and the sick. When unions become obsolete, virtues flourish, and society is sure to benefit. Thank you.